everybody. Today, as part of our virtual Colonial Day, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about making butter. Butter has been around, again, just like candles, for probably 2,000 years. And a long time ago, way back when butter was first started to be made, it was made in animal skins that were turned into vessels, and they would put in the cream from the cow, and they would close the container and they would strap it onto an animal's back, and the movement of the animal all day would cause the butter, the fat, and the buttermilk to separate. So they basically let the animals do the work. As time went by in colonial America, they started using butter churns. Butter churns, there was a different type, a couple different types. There was one made out of wood, and also this is one that would have been made in a kiln or an oven made out of clay that was baked. So that's the type of churn that I have. This may not be exactly what they used in the 1700s, but it's the general idea of how the cream is moved inside a vessel to turn it into butter. So what happens is, when you get cream from a cow, when you freshly milk them, it's nice and warm. It's not cold. Today we would keep our milk, our heavy cream, in the refrigerator, but they didn't have refrigerators. So they would use it as soon as it came out of the cow. It would be room temperature, nice and warm. So that's what we're going to use today. So I have mine from the store, of course, because I don't have a cow. And I'm going to use 2 quarts because this is a really big churn. So my cream is room temperature. So we have 1 quart and 2 quarts. And I already told my family, be ready, you're going to get a lot of freshly made butter from our churning today. Now I'm sitting in my living room by what in colonial times would have been called a hearth. And a hearth is a fireplace that was located in the kitchen. And it doesn't look anything like mine would look like. It would be made from stones, and also all the cooking and all the heating of the house would be done from that one place. So it was centrally located in the kitchen. The kitchen, you've heard said before, is the heart of the home. Well, it truly was in colonial times. So today we're going to use our churn, and I also want to show you the inside of what we're going to use. This is called a dasher, and my dasher is made out of wood, and it's been remade by a friend who is a woodworker. The one that I had in here was really old and it had been used a lot, so I decided to have a new dasher made. A dasher has a wooden peg, and it holds a circle that is actually 2 halves put together with wooden pegs, and in are the holes that causes the cream to be able to slosh in and out and cause that motion that we need to create butter. So this is the lid. It gets a little messy, so I've got a piece of linen under my churn so I won't get it all over my floor. Homes in colonial times had floors made out of dirt, so they didn't really have to be as careful as we do today. I wouldn't want to get butter on my floor because Mrs. K would end up on the floor. That would not be good. So we're going to start. I'm going to start the process. It takes a while, so while we're doing this, I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but I was going to talk to you a little bit about what life was like in colonial America. So women and girls pretty much took care of the home. They would have a lot of work to do, keeping the house clean. Yes, they would sweep their dirt floors. They would keep the animals out, probably. They would have sewing to do. Sometimes, if you were a really poor family, the women of the home would actually have to spin and make fabric on a loom. If you were a little more well-to-do, or if you lived in colonial Boston, you had access to British trade ships, which would bring over clothes and buttons already made until the trade with the British was kind of stopped, they had access to all those things. They had access to coffee, they had access to tea, of course, and different goods like sugar would come over on the ships. So a lot of people think that women made everything. They made the fabric and everything. Their clothes, they didn't have a lot of clothes to wear. One thing that they did have, both men and women and children, and if you look, I'm wearing it under my dress or my gown, and it was called a shift. And a shift was pretty much your underwear and your pajamas. Most people would have 2 shifts so that they were able to wash it once a week. Can you imagine wearing the same shift all day and all night for 7 days, and then having to change it and wear a clean one? So they didn't have the clothes that we had today. Ladies would wear aprons to cover their clothes because they didn't have washing machines, and cleaning clothes was difficult. They would either fill a big pot over the outdoor fire or the indoor fire and boil water and clean it that way, or they may have gone down to a stream or a lake and wash their clothes there. Ladies also always wore head coverings. They always wore a hat, even at night when they were sleeping. Not only did it keep their head warm while they were sleeping, but it was considered to be modest to have very long hair, but your hair would very seldom show. So my hairstyle, my hair would not have shown. People wouldn't have worn their hair like mine today. It would be up and under their cap. They would also wear a kerchief, which is what I have on here. And those were twofold. Those were also a form of modesty to keep your skin covered, and also to wear under your clothes to keep your gown a little bit cleaner from, working outside or getting sweaty during the day. Women would wear long stockings that were held up with a ribbon or a garter, and they also wore shoes, which were made of leather. Sometimes if you lived in Boston, your shoe would be a little fancier. You might have a little heel on it, like a little high heel, or you would just have a flat shoe. Most shoes were tied with either ribbon or buckles. And the men also wore the same type of shoes. Men would have worn a waistcoat, which is like a jacket. Underneath they would have worn their shift, which was also their underwear and their pajamas. And they also would wear breeches, which were a type of pants that had buttons rather than zipper. So they would also wear hats, different types of hats. One of the most common hat was called a tricorn hat, which you may have seen had 3 sides, kind of like a triangle. So our butter is churning away, and what will happen before the butter actually turns into butter? It's going to turn into, it's almost going to look like whipped cream. It's going to get really thick. And then it's like almost magic. All of a sudden, you'll hear a lot of sloshing around, and that will tell you that the butter has changed, and the sloshing that you hear is going to be buttermilk. Buttermilk is great. You can use it to drink. You can use it in baking and cooking. It's the liquid that's left after the butter has separated from the liquid in the churn. It's a lot of work. Not easy like going to the grocery store and buying a pound of butter, but it tastes delicious when it's finished. One thing that I usually add to this is a little bit of salt to add a little bit of flavor, and we'll do that in a few minutes. Salted butter needs to be washed before it's used to make sure we get all the buttermilk out. Back in the days of colonial times, we talked about them not having refrigerators. So what they would do is, instead of adding a little salt to flavor the butter, they would add a lot of salt, like way, way, way too much salt, that whatever tastes good. And what salt is it's a preservative. So the salt would keep the butter from spoiling. And they would store it in a crock, which when this is finished, I'm going to show you. And they would keep it in its salted form. They would have places that they would keep it in the ground, because the ground is cooler, especially in the summertime. Or they may put it into like a root cellar, where it would be nice and cool underground, until they were ready to use it. And so they would take out however much butter they needed, and they would wash it. They would use a wooden bowl, and they would use a butter paddle to wash the salt out. Now you know that salt is fat, so it doesn't mix together with water. So the butter will stay butter, but the salt will be washed away, so it'll make it much more delicious tasting. Let's take a look and see what's happening. You can see it's thickening up, but it's still liquid. So I'm going to keep churning, and when it's ready, I will be back to show you what happened. So I moved my butter churn into the kitchen because it was getting a little messy in there. So I figured I'd move in here. But as you can see, if you look around the top of the dasher, you can see butter starting to pop through. We don't want that to happen. We're not going to eat that butter, but if you look inside, it's getting really thick. So now it looks almost like whipped cream. So if we stopped here and we added sugar, you could put it on top of ice cream and it would be delicious. So we're going to continue. It's pretty close. We're almost at butter. But as you can see, the top gets a little messy. So I figured I'd be better off if I moved into the kitchen. But we'll be back soon when we have butter. I want you to listen to it. Can you hear it? It's not liquid anymore. It's very, very hard to churn right now. And the next time we listen, you should hear the buttermilk. So I'll be back. Can you hear the sloshing going on? That tells me that the fat is separated from the buttermilk. So let's take a look and see what it looks like now. See the buttermilk? And what's left in there is butter. So our butter is ready. It's in the churn. And what I'm going to do is I've taken my crock and I have cheesecloth that I'm going to put inside to strain the buttermilk out of the butter. Save that buttermilk. We can do this without making a big mess. So we're going to pour it in. It makes a lot of butter. It's soft because it will harden up once it's cold in the refrigerator. A little bit more in there. Does make a couple pounds of butter. There's a lot of fat in heavy cream when you see it come out of here. Get that little bit left out of there with our butter paddle that we're going to use later when we wash it. There we go. There's still more in there. Wow. Should open a butter store. Here we go. Put that churn in. This way it's good to have an apron on so you can wipe your hands out. So, all right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the cheesecloth and we're going to squeeze it. And what you see coming out into the crock is buttermilk. Lots of recipes call for buttermilk. You can buy it in the store also, but it's more fun if you make your own. We're gonna squeeze it. See, still coming out. So I've taken the butter out of the cheesecloth and I put it in my butter bowl, and you can see we got a lot of buttermilk in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paddle it a little bit to try to get more of the liquid out before we put it in the fridge. By doing this, you can see there's still some buttermilk that's in there. It'll separate if you leave it in there long enough, but you really want to try to get as much of it out as you can. That's a lot of butter. I told my family be ready. Nice fresh bread with butter. Can you imagine every night at dinner, after working all day out in the fields or on the farm or sewing, you get to sit down to a nice stew with fresh bread and homemade butter. Now, if you'd like to try making butter at home, it's pretty easy. All you'll need is some heavy cream, but you can buy a small container at the grocery store. And if you have a glass jar with a lid, so all you need to do is put in some room temperature cream and fill the jar about halfway full. Add a little bit of salt, just a little bit. You can always add more later. And all you have to do is shake it and shake it and shake it and shake it until it gets really hard to shake, because once it turns into like whipped cream, it's really hard to shake. And keep shaking it, don't give up. And pretty soon you'll hear that buttermilk sloshing and you'll see the separation of butter and buttermilk. So it's pretty cool to do, and you can make your own butter. So a lot of fun, give it a try.